here. There you go. Right on time. Recording in progress. We do have to let you know that this session is being recorded for internal use within TricorBraun and Dale Carnegie. So just an FYI for you all. We are going to get started by answering a quick question and getting some ideas, as well as getting to know one another. We're going to jump right in and make the most of our time. Hopefully you can see my screen. Where did it go? Hold on just a second. Always fun when your technology doesn't necessarily work. We've got a question to answer, so let me go ahead and get it going for you here. There we are. Maybe we'll get it going for you. But the question for us to answer in the chat is, what is, and we're hearing a little background, we're going to go ahead and mute. What is one thing that you should do, but you feel like you don't have time to do? There you go. Now we're screen sharing. So what is one thing that you should do, but you feel like you don't have time to do? Let's go ahead and pop a thought in the chat. What is one thing that you feel like you should do, but it's like, oh man, I just really don't have time for that. For me, it's give my dogs a bath. That's what it is. They really need one, and I should do it, and I feel like I don't have time. Could be personal or professional. If you're not familiar with Zoom and or where the chat is, typically if you hover over your Zoom toolbar, which is sometimes on the bottom of your screen, sometimes on the top, occasionally on the left-hand side, you'll see a toolbar open up, and there should be a chat option there. Just make sure when you're typing in the chat box that you send to everyone, and that way we will see it. So let's see, Arnisha, read a book. Jennifer, get up and take a walk during the day. Dana says, file emails timely. Kate says, take breaks, go on a walk. Dawn says, exercise, take a break. Ooh, Alex, make progress on your certificate, program coursework. What else for those of you just getting signed in? What would you say? What is something that you feel like you should do, but you feel like you don't really have time? Let's see if we can't hear from a few more people there. Take time for you. Yes, not just work, not just TricorBraun all the time. And we're seeing some common themes. It's like, take care of ourselves, get organized, focus on other things aside from work, exercise consistently. Yeah. So if you are still typing in the chat, no worries. We've got a pretty good list going there. You know, sometimes it really can feel overwhelming with all of the shoulds and coulds. And there's so many things that we would like to be doing, but feel like we can't. Time is not really a resource that we can go and get more of by placing an order on Amazon, right? Or going through the drive-through. It's like, oh, there's no ATM for more minutes in the day. But you know what? There's some things that we can do in order to help manage and make our time more effective. We've got some good news and we've got some bad news today. And the bad news is that time flies, but the good news is you are in charge. You are the pilot. Michael Altschuler is the CEO and founder of Icon Office Solutions, creates products that we use on a regular basis. And this quote is really applicable to what we're going to spend our time on today. Is figuring out where our time is spent and how we can better leverage and manage it. My name is Katie Lane, and I lead the St. Louis office of Dale Carnegie, Missouri. Dale Carnegie, Missouri, in partnership with TricorBraun, offers a variety of development resources from leadership to customer service to communication, and this program focused on time management and email effectiveness. I've got someone from my team behind the scenes. Andrew, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself quickly?
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Andrew. I am here to help with the back end, take attendance. If you have technology issues, you can shoot me a message in the chat, and I'll just be here listening in the background. So let me know if you need anything.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Andrew's here to help us, again, get into the breakouts. If you got any technical issues, having trouble hearing anything, feel free to shoot either myself or him over a message, and we will do our best to help you out. So if the bad news is that time flies, and the good news is we're the pilot, we should probably figure out how to do a better job of captaining that time management. So let's now think about where we are going to actually spend our 90 minutes here together today. Our objectives, our mission, our roadmap for the sake of our time together today is going to focus on 4 key areas. We are going to get an understanding of where our time is spent. If we don't know how it's spent, then we can't do a better job of managing it. Secondly, we're going to look at some time management obstacles and figure out how we can work more effectively and efficiently. We are also going to look at some very specific tools to plan, organize, and manage our time. And then lastly, we are going to look at leveraging our time and increasing productivity so that we can work smarter, not harder. So as you look at those 4 objectives that you see here on your screen, think about, you just get to choose one that's going to help you be more effective and efficient with managing your time. Which one is it? Go ahead and type the number in the chat. What would you say? If you got to choose just one of these objectives, there's 4, which one would be helpful for you in leveraging your time? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Got a lot of 3s and 4s. Okay. Jennifer's got a 1. Nice. It's always good to just check in and see what pieces we're most looking forward to from an experience. The good news is we're going to spend time in each of these areas, so we'll gain some tools in each of these areas. So let's go ahead and jump right in. How many of us have either said aloud or to ourselves in our head, I don't have time for this? Gosh, we maybe even said it before we hopped on this session today. Like, I don't have time for this training. I got a lot of other stuff I'm going to do. I just don't have time for this. Well, think about it for a minute. When you tell yourself that, or you even say it aloud, maybe to yourself or to other people, gosh, what types of results are we getting? What are some effects of saying, I don't have time for this? What happens? Go ahead and type a thought in the chat if you've got one. I know for me, for example, if I say, I don't have time for this, I start to act frustrated and probably a little bit less positive. Yeah, Kate says it creates more stress. Renee, yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Frustration. Yeah. What else? Overwhelmed. The only time you say this when there's computer issues. Yeah, technology issues, right? Always happens at the most inconvenient time. Yeah, frustrate. Oh, it could create frustration for the person we're saying it to. Yeah, Gina. Negative connotation. Yeah. So your brain goes there. Absolutely, Sunday. So it's got a negative connotation, and that's where our brain goes. And how many times a day do we say that, or do we think that? Think about that negative churn and burn that we get in. A lot of times when we say this, we start to feel a certain way, right? Whether or not it's overwhelmed or frustrated or stressed or negative. Well, we know that based upon those feelings, certain actions happen. And then those actions get us results. And if all of that starts off as negative as a result of saying, I don't have time for this, then it becomes a vicious cycle that we've got to figure out how to break. So our goal is going to be to break the cycle, to get our minds and our voices saying a little bit less of, I don't have time for this. It can be really, really tough, though, because we're operating in a world right now that is constantly tension between time, cost, and quality. We refer to this as today's business reality. And it's important for us to think about this. A lot of times we can do things quickly, but maybe the cost is going to be up higher and the quality is going to be less. Or if we've got someone who is expecting a high quality packaging solution, well, the cost might go up and the time it takes to produce that is going to go up as well. So these things are in constant flux. And what we usually find is that one of these things drives the bulk of business decisions that we make. So take a moment and think about your specific role and your job. What would you say drives the bulk of your work? Is it focusing on time? Is it, getting things done according to deadline? Is it, again, kicking out those projects by a certain date? Is it something as it relates to cost? You've got to keep costs low or bring in more projects in terms of revenue. Or is it quality that drives the bulk of your decisions? So go ahead and just pop a thought in the chat. What do you think? What drives the bulk of your work, the bulk of your business decisions? Time, cost, quality. Renee, you're going to go a combo on those, huh? Quality, but with the quickest response. Jennifer says cost. We've got some quality. Just interesting for us to think about. And again, interesting for us to remember that it's hard to have all of these three things in complete balance. Yeah, so Dana, best quality for the cost, right? Super high quality, super low cost. That's going to cause some tension. Yeah, Dawn says time, but accuracy. Yeah, Jennifer even ranked them in order of importance. Cost is the most important, right? Then quality, and then time tie. Yeah, interesting. So just important for us to think about. A lot of times we say that, we can usually only have two of these. It's also easy to just have one, but we very rarely see that these three things are completely balanced. And if you think back to the last couple of years and the changing landscape within business, specifically in manufacturing and dealing with supply chains, it has been a real struggle to get things done quickly at lower cost or lower investment with high quality. We're also seeing an emphasis on doing more, doing things better, doing them faster, and doing them with less resources. So take a moment and think about where specifically in your world, in TricorBraun, have you experienced this? Me, for example, I was working with a client last week, and we typically tell clients that we can get a training off the ground and ramped up and ready to go from the yes date to the actual first session, roughly about 6 weeks lead time. Well, this client wants something in 3.5. So they want something high quality, but they want it very quickly. So that's an example I've got of where I've seen it lately. If you've got an idea of where you've seen this more, better, faster with less in your world, go ahead and put a thought there in the chat. Let's see. Where is an example of where you have seen this recently? Faster and better, says Terry. Yes. Yeah, Jennifer says customers or prospects want their packaging at the cheapest cost with the best service and shortest time frame. A lot of demands going on there, right? What else? Yeah, absolutely, Sunday. So at one point, more work, same amount of time to complete, not enough team members or not enough support to make it happen. Alex says working to reduce on-hand inventory while maintaining existing accounts and locating new ones. So it sounds like this is a reality for us, right? But we're not going to just spend the entire session talking about how stressed we are or all the things that are challenging us as it relates to time management. We're actually going to dig in and figure out how we can improve upon some of the things that we are experiencing. If you remember, one of the objectives that we had was all about understanding where our time is spent. We can't manage it if we can't measure it. So what we're going to do next is we are going to grab a scratch sheet of paper, and I'll give you just a second to grab a scratch sheet of paper and something to write with. Pen, pencil, you can even type if you'd like. But in just a moment, I'm going to put 60 seconds on our clock. And in those 60 seconds, your task is going to be to capture as many things as you can on that piece of paper or where you're typing that you do in your workday. Everything from answering customer complaints to making outbound phone calls, whatever it is, go ahead and write down everything that you do during your workday. Maybe it's eating lunch. Maybe it's stopping by people's cubes or their offices, whatever it is. So I am going to go ahead and start a timer. You've got 60 seconds on the clock. You can go ahead and go. All right, that is time. Let's go ahead and pop just one thing that we wrote down in the chat. What'd you come up with? Let's see how many thoughts we can get in there. Choose one of the ones that you wrote down as what you do during your workday. Meetings, yes. Meetings. Check and respond to emails. You got it. Supply chain issues with glass. Read and prioritize emails. Took it a step further. At least 5 prospect reach outs. Supporting internal customers. What else? Following up on POs for sure. Tackling emergencies. Reviewing inventory. Dealing with sourcing issues. Working to reduce aged wear. What else? We'll give it about 15 more seconds. Proving new POs and inventory control. Inbound logistics. Yeah, helping train and support other people. Dealing with stupid vendors. There you go. Oh, you got a couple laughs for that one, Sunday. Quotes for customers. There you go. All right. Well, there's a lot we're expected to do day in and day out. And some of these things are more important than others. But how do we categorize them? So once we understand where our time is spent, we can start to drill down and kind of figure out what's important and what's not. There was a concept developed by a gentleman named Charles Hummel. He developed the concept in the 1960s, and it is referred to as the tyranny of the urgent. If you've never heard of it, it's pretty simple explanation. If you have heard of it, this will be a recap for you. So he said there's really 4 different quadrants where we can spend our time, and he put them on axes, both important and urgent, right? And so he said there's one category, there's one quadrant, things that are in quadrant 1. Those are things that are urgent and important. Things like crises, deadlines, meetings, conflicts, things that pop up that absolutely are important to the business and have to be dealt with in a time-sensitive manner. Now, there's quadrant 2. These are things that are important but aren't urgent. Things like planning, prioritizing, skill development, like we're in today, building relationships with other people. So again, important, but not necessarily, oh, we have a due date on these things or a shelf life when these need to get done. Quadrant 3 are things that are urgent, but not important. Now, this is where this one gets a little tricky. These things might be important to other people, but not necessarily to us. So if you get a phone call from your boss and something is top priority for them, but it's not necessarily for you, that's still urgent, but it's not necessarily important to you. So those are things like phone calls you may need to answer, interruptions when somebody stops by your desk, emails that you absolutely have to answer, voicemails that you have to return. And then in quadrant 4 are things that we hopefully don't spend a whole lot of time on at work. Those are things that are not important and not urgent, but they might be good for us if we're looking at reducing stress. So things like handling junk mail, busy work, maybe taking a break on social media, IMs, playing a couple games. It's estimated that people spend the most time in quadrants 1 and 3. So we spend the bulk of our time in quadrants 1 and 3. Things that are urgent, that might be important, or maybe they're not important. So 1 and 3 is where we spend the bulk of our time. Quadrant 2 is where quality work happens. Big picture thinking, strategy, new ideas, brainstorming. Charles Hummel, who developed this original concept, said that our greatest danger is letting the urgent things crowd out the important. Again, our greatest danger is letting the urgent things crowd out the important, putting out those fires, being really reactive instead of proactive. So take a moment, look back at the tasks that you wrote down when we spent those 60 seconds identifying really what we do on a regular basis. And after we've talked about these 4 different quadrants, where do you think the bulk of your tasks fall? And just pop a number in the chat. If you say, oh gosh, the bulk of mine are in quadrant 1, or maybe your bulk are in quadrant 2. Just put that number in the chat after you look at your list of tasks. Where would you say? Gina's in quadrant 2. Cool. Oh, Gina, I take it back. Quadrant 1, meetings all day. Yeah, so we're proving this theory right, where we spend the bulk of our days in quadrants 1 and 3. So we're going to take a little quiz here to test kind of our understanding of this. So remember, quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is not urgent, but important. Quadrant 3 is urgent, but not important. And 4 is not important and not urgent. So let's run through a couple of questions here, and we're going to work. We've got 6 activities or 6 scenarios, and we're going to work to see kind of where we think these things fall. So what do you think? Someone sends you an email about a project bid that's due in 2 weeks that you are responsible for. What quadrant would you put that in? Is it urgent and important? Urgent and not important? Not urgent, but important? Yeah, sounds like quadrant 2, right? 2 weeks out. We've got to vote for 3 too, right? Not urgent, but it could be, or it's urgent, not important, could be important to them. Yeah, we got it. What about there was a safety issue at a warehouse this morning? What do we think? Urgent and important, quadrant 1. Not urgent, not important. Yeah, I'd probably say that's a pretty time sensitive manner, right? All right, next one, and this probably happens to a lot of us on a regular basis. Someone stops by your office and asks if they can run something by you. Urgent and important, not urgent, not important. Kind of depends, right, on what they want to run by you. Yeah. All right, here's another one. This has probably all happened to us too. Someone sends us a link on Amazon to a sweater that they said, yeah, you should definitely buy this. We're on number 4. There you go. You're picking this up. Number 5, you have to study for a professional development certification test next month. What would you say? Where does that go? Yeah, could be quadrant 2, could be 3, could be 4. All right. And last but not least, and sadly, this has probably happened to a lot of us. You come into the office after lunch and see that you have 50 emails waiting for you. Could be urgent and important. Guess it kind of depends on what the emails are, right? Nice. All right. So we've got a pretty clear understanding of that tyranny of the urgent. To make sure we're understanding how it applies to our world, we are going to have some discussion. Carrie's crying with that emoji. It sounds like that might be the reality for her. Andrew's going to help us get into breakouts here momentarily, and we're going to answer some questions in those breakouts. In those small groups, we're going to take about 8 minutes, and we're going to answer the question of, where do you spend most of your time? How do you know? Second question is, look back at your list. What quadrant do a lot of your activities fall into, right? Just have some quick discussion. And maybe some people view the same activities as falling into different quadrants. You get to decide. And then lastly, if you could decide where you wanted to spend your time, how would you split it up? So if you were the master of your own destiny, no distractions, nothing else getting in your way, where would you say? How would you slice that pie? 100% of your time, where would it be spent? So I just put those questions into the chat. So you should see those there. Andrew will open up the breakouts momentarily. Once he does that, you'll automatically go into the breakout room. You can unmute yourself. You can pop on camera. You can use the chat to communicate. It's up to you. But we're going to be in groups of 3 or 4 probably and spend about 8 minutes. Fair warning, we are going to ask for some of the groups to report out on these questions when we come back together. Before we go into those breakouts, though, who has a question about either the activity that we're doing or the logistics of the breakout? If you do, feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hand and we will address it. All right, Andrew, I'm not seeing any hands or questions. Are we ready behind the scenes to go into those breakouts?
Yeah, we are ready to go. So when I click this button, you will all be moved automatically into the breakout room. Nothing you need to do. And when the time is up, you'll automatically be moved back and you'll have about a 1-minute warning that'll pop up on your screen to kind of let you know to wrap up the discussion.
Cool.
All right, here we go.
Thank you. Awesome. Welcome back. If you're just coming back, go ahead and share the screen again. Everybody else has about 40 seconds until they are automatically back in the main room. So we'll give them time to join on back and give it go from there. Got about 10 more seconds.
Recorded. This meeting is being recorded.
All the time.
Great. It looks like everybody should be back in the main room. So thank you. Hopefully you had some good productive discussion in your breakouts. Let's see if we can't hear a couple of thoughts. What were some of the discussions surrounding these questions having to do with, somebody just got an alert, having to do with the tyranny of the urgent? If you would be willing to voice what your group talked about, go ahead and raise your hand. Who would be willing to go first? You hover over the participant list. You've got the option to raise your hand. You can also hover over the toolbar and do reactions, and you should be able to. Gina, thank you. We see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'll take one for the team here.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
So I took a picture of the quadrants, but we didn't take a picture of the questions. And so when we got moved over, we couldn't see the questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they would have shown up in the chat. I apologize.
No, we didn't see it. But so
Okay.
we just did 1 and 3.
Perfect. So
And
tell us about your discussion. No worries.
I mean, I think Dawn said she spent the majority of time in 1. I think Nika and I were like, well, a little bit of 1, a little bit of 2, and a little bit of 3.
Okay.
So I'm not quite sure that was the intention of the project.
That's okay.
But, for me, I'm in meetings all day long. Doesn't mean it's urgent. They're just meetings that are set up.
Do you have to? So here's a question for you. Do you feel like you have to be a part, or you have to be in? Is it relevant for you to be in all the meetings that you're invited to?
So I can tell you that I have gone through that exercise, and
Gotcha.
I do not attend meetings if I don't need to be. I am
Awesome.
totally good about saying, nope, I don't need to go to that one.
There you go. And that's kind of where I was going with it, right? Because
Yep.
a lot of us, it's like we're in the habit of accept, especially dependent on who sends us the meeting invite. And that's where we can get into trouble, is like, yeah, I should be at that meeting. But it's really refreshing when you recognize that you don't have to go to every meeting if your presence really isn't needed in it. Yeah. Any other thoughts from your group discussion, Gina?
The only other thing I can comment on was the third question. I think majority of us said we would love to be in 2.
Yeah.
But we also said, well, it's meetings in 1, building relationships in 2, dealing with phone calls in 3, and dealing with the interruptions, because that's just part of the business.
Yeah.
So it was kind of hard to pinpoint, but I said, overall, ideally, we're in number 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Dawn or Nika have anything to add.
Yeah, that's great that you recognize, ideally you'd be in 2. You all are a consumer company, right? And so you're providing a product to consumers. So whether or not you're in a customer service role, you're in a sales role, you're in a leadership role, there are definitely going to be some things that are urgent and important that you have to respond to because you're serving customers, whatever capacity it's in. And that's tough, right? So yeah, thanks for that.
100%.
Yeah. Thanks, Gina, for taking one for the team. Let's see if we can't hear from another group. 1 or 2 more thoughts before we move forward. Who else would like to tell us about their group's discussion? If you would go ahead and raise your hand, or feel free to just pop off mute and jump right in. We'd love to hear from you. You can also always pop a thought in the chat if there was something great that your group came up with and you want for the rest of us to hear about it. Give it about 30 more seconds to see if we got a volunteer.
Well, I'm going to call out my wine pack people that are on the call. I know there's a couple of you.
Nice. All
Come on,
right.
guys.
Gina's co-facilitating. Gina, you're going to take the next 10 minutes. All right, let's hear from somebody else who's with Wine Pack. What you got?
I'll add to what Gina said. We were in the same group.
Thanks, John.
Sure, but for number 1, I think what happens for me anyway is I put things in that category that don't necessarily need to be in that category.
Ooh, okay.
And so it's we talked about maybe blocking off some time to do some other things so that unnecessary things don't end up in the urgent category, and then then you sort of get stuck there. And if a crisis comes up, you put all your energy into that, and then again, you're stuck, and then everything becomes urgent. So if you can put some time aside, to do some planning, block off your calendar, put yourself on busy, it can help with taking some of those things out of the urgent category.
Yeah.
Just something that we talked about as a suggestion.
Yeah, it's like if you load that quadrant 1 category really heavy, then you're not going to have time to spend in the other quadrants. Yeah, I like that idea. So how can you like create some more open space in quadrant 1? So when those things come up, crises, conflicts, critical customer needs, you've got time for those and they don't like crowd out the rest of your stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. I like it. You've got some people who are liking that there in the chat. And then Kate says focus timer in Teams helps. Yeah. And we're going to talk about some techniques here in a few minutes to help us be really intentional about carving out our time. So thank you to Gina and Dawn for weighing in. Again, if you have an additional thought that you'd be willing to share with us, feel free to pop it in the chat. We've kind of talked about like how and where our time is spent, but we're going to now look at like how we can leverage our effectiveness kind of based on the time of day where we might be effective. So we're going to pop up a thought here on the slide. And the thought is our ability and the degree to which we manage our job or let it manage us will determine our ultimate success. So we've got to be the ones in charge of our tasks and of our to-dos, and that's going to help us to be more successful. Well, how we deal with and manage these things really can come from scientific research. There's a whole concept called chronotypes. Now, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But chronotype is the scientific term for what a lot of times we talk about as our internal clock, right? So we generally talk about or think about that internal clock in terms of like when we go to sleep at night, when we wake up in the morning, kind of when we're tired, etc. But the chronotype actually deals with a whole lot more. Yes, it is kind of our internal wake and sleep time, but our specific chronotype, our internal clock, can actually determine like when we make decisions, like when we're the most focused, depending on our chronotype, how likely we are to make mistakes at a certain point in the day, whether or not we're in a good mood or a bad mood, how we handle conflict and make decisions. So we're going to spend a little bit of time understanding our own personal chronotype and figure out how we can capitalize on when we're most effective. There is a book called When, W-H-E-N, and it is by the author Daniel Pink, and I will type it in the chat here for you. If you're someone that likes to read or listen to books, would recommend it. So Daniel Pink in his book basically says that the human population can be categorized as one of 3 types of chronotypes: the lark, the owl, or the third bird. And we're going to figure out which ones we are and also what it might mean to us. So we can figure out what we are, a lark, an owl, or a third bird, by answering a couple of different questions. So you just need to jot down a couple of ideas here. You don't need to put them in the chat. And this is super high level, really in-depth scientific, but it gives us a general idea of where we're going to fall. So first and foremost, think about what time do you usually go to bed? For me, I would like to say 9 o'clock. It's usually more realistically about 10 o'clock, right? And then secondly, what time do you usually wake up? For me, I'm usually up by 6 o'clock. So I would say usually go to bed by 10, usually wake up about 6 o'clock. I'm a person that likes a good 8 hours, right? And then go ahead and calculate the midpoint between those two times. So for example, I said I go to bed about 10 o'clock and I wake up about 6. So that's 8 hours. Split it in 2. I need to find the 4-hour midpoint. So my midpoint is going to be 2 a.m. So everybody, once you've calculated your midpoint between your wake and sleep time, go ahead and just pop it in the chat so we know that people are understanding this. So again, when do you usually go to bed? When do you usually wake up? And then what's the midpoint between those 2 times? All right. Cool. All right, so here's how this looks, and I'm going to go ahead and read this. If your midpoint of sleep is 3:30 a.m. or earlier, you are a lark. So remember that, and I'll type this in the chat. 3:30 a.m. or earlier is your midpoint. You are a lark. Okay? Now, if your midpoint of sleep is 5:30 a.m. or later, you are probably an owl. And if you're in between those 2 times, you are what they call a third bird. So remember that. So for example, Dawn, you are a third bird. Me, I am a lark. So go ahead and jot down what you think you are. All right, now what exactly does this mean? Well, if we think about it on a graph of terms of chronotypes and productivity, this is kind of showing us that midpoint of sleep. And this is just in general, the bulk of the population. So most of the people in a population are third birds, about 65%. About 65% are third birds, right? In between that 3:30 and 5:30 midpoint. Larks, smallest component, about 14% of the population is larks. Owls, about 21%, right? So it looks like we've got a handful of larks on here and some third birds. All right. Okay. So this is important because we all go through similar cycles throughout our day. Usually, and this is not necessarily one specific, a lark, an owl, or a third bird. This is just a graph to give you an idea. But throughout our day, day in and day out, we all go through different time periods. We go through a period where we're at our peak, we're at our best. Then we go through a period, usually after the peak, where we're in a trough. It's kind of like, oh, I'm feeling really drained. This is not great. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this afternoon without another cup of coffee, right? And then a little bit later, we get that rebound. So it's important for us to remember that we've got a peak, we've got a trough, and we've got a rebound. And if we can do a good job of understanding when those happen for us, then we can focus and accomplish some really great things based on this time. So let's look at this. Again, these are just tips. So if you are a lark, a third bird, or an owl, this is a suggestion of when you might focus on the tasks on the left-hand side of that graph. So for me, for example, as a lark, tasks that require decisions are very analytical, things where I want to make a positive impression. I should focus on those pretty early in the day. And I know that about myself. I know that I should focus on projects that need my full attention and require strategy, like pretty early on in my day. Now, if you're a third bird or an owl, the time when you're most effective with those things is probably going to be a little bit different. So, for example, larks have a peak that's a lot earlier than owls. That trough is also going to be earlier That rebound is going to be happening perhaps when those owls are in their trough. So this really, really impacts the time of day when we should be doing things. So take a moment and just digest this slide here. It makes sense when you think about it. You think about, gosh, if you're in meetings all morning long, and then as a result of those meetings, you're expected to go out and make things happen that require a lot of your attention and are heavy decision-making, big strategy. And the only time you have to work on those are in the afternoon, and you're a lark, gosh, your schedule's doing yourself a disservice. I was just having this conversation yesterday. I was working with a colleague of mine on a project that we had to put together from scratch. And we were working on it at 3 o'clock yesterday. And we both looked at each other and go, this was a terrible idea to start this right now, because we're so much better in the morning. So we're going to get into quick breakouts again, and we're going to spend just a couple of minutes, about 5 minutes in our breakout group, discussing what we think about this concept. Are we bought into it? Do we believe it? What can we take away from this? Do we maybe need to tweak our schedule? Is that a realistic possibility? So Andrew will get us ready to get into those breakouts. But before we do that, who's got a question? We're just having some quick overall discussion about this idea of chronotypes. All right, Andrew, I'm not seeing or hearing any questions. Yes, can you fall into both? There's a lot of people that are on the line. Yes, Sunday. So there are a lot of people that are on the line. And so you might be able to ebb and flow. And sometimes it's dependent on your environment too, right? We know for some people, going to bed at a certain time, maybe if you're traveling, et cetera, is not realistic, or you've got a different work schedule or something going on in your life. So there's different scenarios that may dictate us falling into different areas. This is really aimed at making us aware of like general tendencies to get a picture of, when should I schedule those big important decisions or making that positive impression, et cetera. Yeah, thanks. Who's got the next question before we hop into those breakouts? All right, Andrew, I think we are ready to rock and roll.
All right, here we go.
Okay, cool. See you back here in 5. Should be coming back momentarily. There we go. Awesome. Welcome back. We should all be back in the main portion, the main room. If you don't mind to just go ahead and mute yourself for those of you. Thank you. Coming back. Let's see if we can't hear 1 or 2 thoughts from some different people. Just what was the discussion all about in your breakout? What were your thoughts on kind of this chronotype situation? You can either just jump right in, hop off mute, or feel free to go ahead and raise a hand. What'd you come up with? Yes, Jennifer. Thank you, ma'am. Go for it.
I will volunteer first. I think the first thing is what we are inherently versus what we need to be for work. So I think.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, I think there's like that natural cadence that you may fall into. So I think naturally I am an owl, but I can't exactly go to bed at like 1, 2 in the morning and wake up at 10, 11 o'clock because that just doesn't work.
You so can't just sign into work at like 11 o'clock.
Yeah. So I think that's why the majority of us are third birds, just because we're falling into that rhythm.
Yeah. So it's like, that's what the job is requiring of us. And that's an interesting way to think about it, right? If you think about, kind of normal working hours, right, are typically for a lot of businesses, it's that 9 to 5, that 8 to 5 with a lunch break, wherever you may fall. There are organizations though, with greater, and sometimes roles with greater flexibility, right? To say, I'm going to work from 7 to 3. Or, it's okay if, I am working for 4 hours right now, and then I know a little bit later in the day, I'm going to sign back in and work. So yeah, it's 2 different distinctions, what we are naturally and what the job requires of us. So interesting way to think about it. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see if we can't hear another thought. It sounds like that was a commonality with one of the other groups as well. Who else would like to jump in and give another thought? Feel free to either raise a hand or you can just pop off mute and let us know what your thoughts were. See if we can't hear one more before we move forward.
Well, for us, for work, we know that we should not be making any big decisions in the late afternoon or during doing any big transactions in the afternoon. It's like,
yeah,
leave that for the next day.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting to think about. And if you can come up with an example, and you think about, gosh, somebody came to me with this at 3 o'clock and I was just really wiped. My brain power was depleted from the day. Right. And maybe you waited until the next day and you made a completely different decision, or you saw things very differently because you gave it that time when you were more clear. It's also scientifically proven that the longer the day goes on, the less willpower we have with things. So that's kind of interesting to think about. And so, we just get depleted as we go throughout our day, no matter what time it is. So if you're being tasked with doing big, important things or decisions later on in your day, whether or not later in your day is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, that can be tough. And it's just important for us to remember. Yeah. All right. Nice thoughts. Would encourage you to check out that book, Daniel Pink Win, or even just Google it. He's got a website that explains things a little bit more in depth. So if we know when we're most effective, but we've got a lot on our plate, we now are going to look at some tips to help us kind of plan and prioritize. Some of these will be new to you. Some of them will not be new to you, but hopefully we'll gain a couple of ideas and some takeaways that might be helpful for us. So we're going to look at 6 different ways that we can better plan and prioritize our work in order to be more effective. The first is create a to-do and a to-don't list. So I am confident that everybody here has heard of a to-do list. Now, maybe you haven't heard of a to-don't list. So a to-do list, right? We know what that is. We create a list of everything that needs to happen. Maybe we prioritize it. Maybe we use the ABC method, the 1, 2, 3. Are these things that absolutely have to happen today? Do these have a DO or a DUE date, right? Am I scheduling out time to work on these things right now, or they actually do DUE by a certain date? A to-don't list, think about what distractions you have or things that you absolutely want to make sure you don't focus on when you're trying to get something done. So for example, maybe you say, all right, I've got to work on this presentation. And for the next 2 hours on my to-don't list is I am not going to check my email. Now that might freak some of you out, but guess what? If we know that's a distraction for us, we want to make sure and put it on our to-don't list. So a to-don't list should have things on it that are going to drain our energy or create distraction for us, are not going to serve us well. So think about that. Again, maybe it's going to allow negativity to creep into our mind, right? Here's things I need to do, and here's things that I know I absolutely don't need to do. And maybe the to-don'ts are also positive. So maybe a to-don't for the day is, I am not going to sit for longer than 30 minutes without taking a stretch break. Remember, some of us said getting up and walking around was something we know we should do, but we don't make time for it. Those shoulds and those coulds, we can tackle those. So think about to do versus to don't to help you leverage your time and energy. Second one, use a Pomodoro. Don't know if you've heard of this, but a Pomodoro is a technique, and a Pomodoro is actually a kitchen timer. Kind of interesting, right? But a Pomodoro is basically working for a set amount of time and then taking a short break. So this concept was developed in the 1980s, and it uses a kitchen timer to break work into intervals. Typically, a Pomodoro time frame is 25 minutes and then followed by a short break. Each interval of time is called a Pomodoro. So maybe you say, all right, I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes and I'm going to work on one thing for 25 minutes. And then I'm taking a 5-minute break. And then I'm going to do the next thing for 25 minutes. So the end goal of the Pomodoro is to really reduce interruptions and distractions and to keep our head in the zone. For a lot of people, if we know I only need to focus or only need to work on this for 25 minutes and then I can take a break, we can kind of tap into some additional motivation versus if we're kind of feeling burnt out or dreading doing something. So that Pomodoro kind of breaks it down into those bite-sized pieces. Next one. These are not rocket science, but things we should do. Take a break. There are a couple different kinds of procrastination. There's productive procrastination. There's unproductive procrastination. Sometimes taking a break can be considered productive procrastination. If you say to yourself, all right, you know what? I'm going to use Pomodoro. I'm going to work for 25 minutes and then I get 5 minutes of social media time. Or I'm going to work for 25 minutes and then I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to work for 25 minutes and I'm going to walk down the hall to a coworker's office and chit chat for a bit, right? So there is value in actually scheduling and taking that break. Sometimes just getting up, standing up, walking around, getting a breath of fresh air. The next one, number 4, batch tasks and block time. So batching tasks is a productivity strategy that involves grouping similar tasks together to complete in one time period. So the main purpose of this is to avoid context switching or mentally jumping back and forth between tasks. Multitasking, it's not something that we can actually do, and task switching can cause us to waste time. So this may look like, you've got phone calls to make. All right, great. In the morning, when I know I'm at my sharpest and I've got to call and check in on customers, I'm going to set 2 hours aside and make all of those phone calls, right? So versus I'm going to make phone calls, then check some emails, then get distracted by, whatever's going on down the hallway. Where can we batch our tasks together to keep that focus strong on immediately what's in front of us, right? We want to make sure that we're not jumping from one task to another. We're not really getting more done. We're challenging our brains and stretching it and really depleting our mental reserves. Next one, schedule meetings with yourself. What in the world does this mean? Well, this is kind of working on ourselves versus working continuously in the role that we're doing. So maybe you put on your calendar, 30 minutes to think big picture, 30 minutes to spend in quadrant 2, 30 minutes to take an actual lunch break, scheduling meetings with yourself. For many of us, if we don't put it on our actual calendar, it's probably not going to happen. And the last one, and please don't leave this session and go, you know what? I was told to sleep for 10 to 20 minutes during work. But 10 to 20 minutes, if you're the type of person who likes to take a quick break and can actually sleep for 10 to 20 minutes, this is a productive time period. It's not too long. It's not too short. The best and most productive naps are between 10 and 20 minutes long. Naps longer than that kind of create what they refer to as sleep inertia, where we really get into like the REM sleep and that groggy feeling. We actually have a team member of ours who works for us, and you will see on his calendar sometimes, nap. Kid you not. And you know what? He gets his job done, and he may work at 8 o'clock at night after he's taken a nap in the late afternoon because he knows he's going to be better once he takes that. Our managing partner, she's been known to take a nap in her office for 10 to 20 minutes to refreshen herself. Now, maybe this is realistic for the environment you're in. Maybe it's not. Occasionally, I can just tell if I'm tapped out. And if I close my eyes for 10 to 15 minutes, I feel better. Whether or not I actually sleep is one thing, but just trying to shut down your brain, slow down, that can be helpful. Again, please don't leave this session and say, hey, that Dale Carnegie session was great. They told us to nap, if that's realistic for you. So take a moment and think about, out of these 6 tips, Which one do you think might be realistic and helpful for you to try to help you leverage your time? Just pop a thought in the chat. What would you say? Nika loves the sleeping part. Pomodoro. Yep. Focus timer on Teams. Yes. Batching tasks. Occasionally I'll set a timer a little bit further than the Pomodoro, but I'll say to our team, if I'm in the office, hey, I'm going to set a timer for an hour. I can't talk to you for that hour. I've got to get this done. You can talk to me after that. Right. And it works. Yeah. Let's see what else. If you have not yet weighed in the chat, please let us know. What are you planning on doing? So we've got some things we might try, and we will make these materials available to you afterwards by sending the slide deck out. So no worries on that. If you feel like you're furiously writing something down, I apologize. I probably should have said that at the beginning, right? So we can have the best laid plans in place, but we might get derailed. Now, we might not actually get punched in the mouth. But sometimes at work, when we look at our email inbox and see it full, see it flooded, it may feel like that gut punch. So we're going to take a quick survey now. It is called a Mentimeter, and I'm going to pull it up for us and then share my screen. All you will need to do is I will pop the instructions in and let me share my screen. We're going to kind of see how we're doing with emails. So hopefully it is loading here, and I'll pop the instructions in the chat, but we are going to take a quick survey about emails. All right. So all you need to do is open up a new browser window and go to www.menti.com. And I will type the instructions in the chat. It'll ask you for a code. The code is 69583538. And then you should be given the option to vote on one of those. Go ahead, let us know how many emails are in your inbox right now. 0 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, 76 to 100, 100 plus. Again, the instructions are in the chat. They're also at the top of your screen there. Go to about 30 more seconds. So it looks like we're at kind of two different extremes here, team. Some of us are in that 0 to 25. Others of us are in that 100 plus. I know I've got a friend of mine and she's got an iPhone, and you know how the count is on the bubble of the iPhone. She's got something like 13,000 emails. And I tell her all the time, I'm like, that would give me an anxiety attack. Unread 13,000. Oh, in your inbox right now, I'd say all together in your inbox right now. But my girlfriend has like 13,000 that look unread. All right. Yeah. So, hey, for some of us, that might stress us out. For others, maybe not. So we're going to look at a couple different tools before we wrap things up today to help us to hopefully manage that email inbox. So let's look at these tools. It can probably sometimes feel like email runs our life, and hopefully these tools we're going to look at will give us a little bit of hope in terms of things that we can do, right? So sometimes we might feel like that person in the picture where it's like the email is just flying at us. Before we look at some of these tips, what are some tips that you've either heard and or tried for managing email? If you've got one that you've heard or you have tried, go ahead and pop it in the chat. We'll see what we already know about handling email. What have you heard or what have you tried? Yeah, quick steps. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with that, you can create quick steps so that you can quickly put emails into folders. Thanks, Kate. Anybody else? Color code priority. Yeah, focus them. View as a conversation. So the way that we view them might be helpful. Yeah. All right. We're going to go ahead and reveal some of these tips that we have for handling email. So it's estimated that the average professional gets about 120 emails a day. Now, for some of us, that may seem low. For some of us, that may seem high. For me, that's probably a little high. I'd say maybe I'm like 50 to 60 per day. But average professional, about 120 per day. So it's easy to lose control when we have to deal with that. So it's estimated also by studies done that for a lot of us, reading, responding to, writing emails takes up as much as 28% of our work week, which is a lot. We weren't just hired to answer emails or send emails, but it's a huge component of communication. And so that email constantly poses a threat to take over all that we are doing. So first and foremost, one of the greatest tips, it ties back to that task batching. Allocate a specific time for email. We used to have a team member here at Dale Carnegie. He checked his email. He actually opened up his Outlook on his actual computer 2 times a day. First thing when he got into the office in the morning, last thing in the hour before he left. Now, he checked it on his phone occasionally just to make sure there was nothing critical, but his time for email was at the front of his day and at the back of his day so that he could focus. It's estimated that the average employee checks their email 74 times a day. 74 times a day. That is pretty crazy. And even though email seems a little bit less intrusive than a phone call, for a lot of people, if you have those alerts on, it's like when we see that little envelope, we get really excited about things, right? And we might even get some anxiety if we don't look at it right away. So just blocking time to check that email, respond to emails. Now, for some of us, maybe that's not realistic if we are customer facing or leading a big team or project. I know for me personally, I don't have my work email on my phone. That was a big step for me. And so I will check my work email a lot of times at the end of the day before I head to bed. And I'll usually check in first thing in the morning, but it's not on my phone. So when I'm not in front of my computer, I don't have it on there. My job does not necessarily demand that of me, right? Next one is to hit the delete or archive button. The less you have actually in your inbox staring you at in the face, the less stress you're probably going to have. Sometimes hitting that delete button is therapeutic. You can always find emails by searching if you archive them, right? If you've got emails from 2 months ago that you've got flagged that you haven't responded to, go ahead and get rid of those. I guarantee you that person is not sitting around after 2 months waiting for a response from you, right? So if your ambition is to reply to those one day, like someday I'm going to get to all these emails, guess what? There's a shelf life on those. You got to let it go sometimes. So hitting the delete or the archive button is something that can be helpful, allowing you to search a little bit later on. When you archive things in Microsoft Office or in Outlook, it's basically saying, hey, I'm putting these somewhere for a later date and they are searchable. So the better you are at searching within Outlook, the less emails you need to have in folders or in your email inbox. The third one is to get organized. So what specifically do you need to keep? How do we create quick steps, labels, categories, folders? Are there things that we know can quickly go into certain folders? How many folders do we need? How can we find this stuff later on? That's kind of a quadrant 2 activity, taking time to get yourself organized, but it goes a long way. There's 2 questions you can ask yourself when you see an email come in Pretty simple questions. Ask yourself, 1, does this email require action? And 2, do I need to keep it? So when an email pops in, does this require action? And do I need to keep it? Ask yourself those 2 questions. If it requires action, cool. Maybe you take that action right now. If it doesn't require action, then do you need to keep it? Get rid of it. If you don't, no need to have it in there. Now, if it requires action, suggested to follow the 1-minute rule. If it's something that you can take care of, a reply in 1 minute, go ahead and knock it out. It takes more effort if you leave that email to be sitting there and dive back into it at a later date. If it takes longer than 1 minute, you might need to schedule time to work on it later. So again, if it's just a quick, hey, where do you want to go for lunch today? And you've got that idea in your head, go ahead, respond to it right away, right? And then we've got one final tip. And this is going to tie back to our grade school geography. So who knows what state this lovely teacher is pointing at? If you remember what state this is, go ahead and pop it in the chat. Yeah, Jennifer's on it. Ohio. So Ohio can stand for an acronym. This is actually something that's big in time management. Ohio stands for only handle it once. So this is a principle in time management that focuses on making a decision right away and getting something off our plate. Back to that 1 minute rule, right? If something takes 1 minute, go ahead and knock it out, get it off your plate, only handle it once. If it's something that requires more time and energy, don't keep going back and looking at it, but schedule time to work on it in the future. The less you can handle email, the better, because the less you're diving in and out of it. So take whatever action needs to be taken and archive it or file it away. Because we have a tendency to put off replying to emails that we don't want to, or thoughts that we might need to make decisions on, things that are lurking, we struggle with this only handle it once. But it's a cool concept to think about in like, all right, how can I be very efficient with things that I'm doing? Again, when an email pops in, I just got an email from our corporate office earlier today. I knew it was going to take me about 90 seconds to scan. You know what I did while I was waiting for you all to come online? I scanned it real quick and I filed it away in our corporate folder. Had nothing that I needed to take action on. I have no reason to go back and look at that email. I handled it once. It is off my plate, out of my email inbox. So we have spent almost 90 minutes together talking about where we spend our time, how we can be our most effective based on chronotypes, some specific time management tips, and focus specifically on email as well. Now, what can you commit to doing and taking action on as a result of our time together today? So what is one tip that you're walking away with? One thing that spoke to you from our time today that you think you might be able to implement right away. Once you know what that is, go ahead and toss it in the chat. What do you think? What are we leaving here today with? Batching, says Alex. Yes. Another tip I heard with batching was to batch time for 2 different kinds of work, deep work and shallow work. So that kind of refers to those different quadrants or even chronotypes. So shallow work is things like, planning out, meetings for the next day. Deep work is maybe proposals for clients, right? Yeah, blocking time, 1 minute rule. Ohio, yep. I was talking with my father-in-law. He's in his 70s. And I was telling him about some time management stuff I was working on. He goes, how about Ohio? He got really excited. He knew about it too. Yeah. Ranking how urgent and important something is. Blocking time, catching up. Yes. Batching tasks, blocking time. It takes time to get organized. So some of these things that we talked about today take a little bit of time, and that can be kind of tricky. It's like, oh my gosh, in order to manage my time and stay organized, I have to spend time. But if we are willing to spend a little bit of time in quadrant 2, we're going to save ourselves the time and energy, right? So would encourage you all to actually do the thing that you just put in the chat, the thing that you committed to doing. So if you take nothing else away from our time together, remember that you're in control of your time. Jack Welch has a great quote, and he says, there is no such thing as work-life balance. There are choices, and you make them, and they have consequences. So something to think about. There's no such thing as work-life balance. They're choices, and you make them, and they have consequences. So choose wisely with what you decide to spend your time on and see where you can be more effective. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this session today and collaborating. We'll stick around for another minute or two if you've got any additional questions or thoughts. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, everybody. Good. Glad you found some tips and helpful.